Hello, everyone. Welcome and belated wishes of Maharashtra Day, which was on 1st of May. And as a tribute to the present-day state of Maharashtra, I thought I would do a small presentation, well, not really small, a presentation on a dynasty that has left its absolutely indelible print on the history and landscape of Maharashtra, particularly of the early historic period. So I'll go back to my slides and start my slideshow. So today we're going to talk about the Satavahanas, one of the preeminent ancient dynasties of Maharashtra. And as I said, a group of people or dynasty kings who left a very strong impression on history, culture, trade, commerce, everything that you name, particularly in the post-Mauryan period, which is sort of dated to about 2nd century BC onwards, and until about 400 years. This is a map showing you the rough extent of the Satavahana rule at its height, which was sort of reached in early 2nd century AD. As you can see, at various points, the dynasty controlled practically all of today's Maharashtra, practically all of today's Telangana, parts of Andhra Pradesh, virtually the northern half of Karnataka, and the southern half of what is now Madhya Pradesh and parts of Chhattisgarh as well. So in the post-Mauryan epoch, the dynasty reached a vast geographic area. In a nutshell, the dynasty seems to have gone through two phases of expansion. The first phase is a kind of before 1st century AD expansion, and the second phase is after 1st century AD. So 1st century AD sort of marks a kind of a watershed between the dynasty's fortunes, in a way. We have various history on our hand, and a lot of the current history writing is based, you open a standard textbook of ancient Indian history, and what you read in there is based on textual evidence for the Satavahanas. Prime locators of textual evidence for Satavahanas are these texts called the Puranas. And these are sort of ancient Indian semi-mythical texts that tell you stories and guide you through morals and ethics and various other religious bits. But they also have a section called Vanshanucharitam, which means dynastic lists. And this is where all the dynasties are kind of mentioned. And very curiously, a lot of Puranas mention them in the future tense, as in they will come. X will come after Y, and this will happen after that. So it's a kind of future tense narrative. Particularly important for Satavahana history are Matsya, Vayu, Brahmanda, and Bhavishya Puranas. So these are the Puranas where you get this, at the end, you get a list of Satavahana rulers. In addition to the Puranas, which are kind of a Brahmanic corpus of literature, you also have Jain texts. And in the Jain texts like Tilovya Pannati and Avashyaka Churni, you get references to king of Satavahanas, the Satavahana dynasty ruling from Pratishthan or Paitan, which was their prime seat. In addition to these Indian texts, there are of course Western texts, and there is of course most important text, Western text that you get information about the Satavahanas is Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which is a manual of seafaring, which was written by an anonymous sailor. And it's I always say this in my talks, that it is almost like an ancient Lonely Planet guide. So it's like you are going from Alexandria or Egypt to India, and this is how you should go. This is what you will see. This is what you should do. These are the political backlashes or dangers, and these are the political advantages for business or whatever. So this is a kind of a guide that tells you all about it. And in that guide, you have lots of references to what was going on around when this guide was compiled. There's a lot of folklore about the Satavahanas. I mean, the one very famous story, particularly in the Deccan, is how Vikramaditya, who was living in Paitan, sort of then goes and defeats the Shakas in Gujarat. And this, obviously, you can see that there is a kind of a conflation of two layers. There's the Gupta king Vikramaditya defeating the Scythian Kshatraps in Gujarat is conflated over an earlier narrative of something similar that had happened. So the kind of conflict, memory of the conflict, which we'll see later in the presentation, is very much alive in this narrative. And then the story is that he brings to life terracotta army by sprinkling the nectar of immortality, which is given to him by his mother, who's from a Naga tribe. So this is a kind of folklore story that one hears. These textual narratives or stories or evidences have their own limitations. For example, we know that the narrative in the Puranas is very linear. It tells you there were the Mauryas, then there were Shungas, then there were Khandvas, and then there were Andhras. So it's a very kind of linear, it's a kind of line, a single line explanation that is mapped onto a chronology in the Puranas. And if you actually see, as we shall see later, the evidence on the ground is very much different. It doesn't tell you that. It doesn't say that, doesn't tell us that the narrative was linear at all, in fact. Quite interestingly, it challenges some of the core principles of this narrative, such as the existence of this imperial dynasty called the Shungas. We have very little evidence on the material side of whether the Shungas existed, where did they exist, if so, and what exactly was their imperial quote-unquote role in this linear narrative. The nature of the textual evidence is, of course, very fragmentary. I mean, you can get only about 2 or 3 paragraphs in the Periplus about the Satavahanas. So it's not exactly a history story. It's something else that the textual evidence is describing, and we have to gloss over the details of Satavahana rule from those little snippets, as it were. Being transmitted through oral method, textual evidence is often subject to a lot of omissions and interpolations. So it keeps on changing. For example, the names of the kings change quite a lot in various editions of the Puranas. The name of certain kings, such as Simuka, who was the founder of the Satavahana dynasty, is mentioned as Shishuka, Chimuka, Chipraka, Chindaka, whatever. So there are lots of variations in that in such factual details. The other body of evidence that we have on hand is, of course, the material evidence, and this should have been the more important body of the evidence at our disposal. And that particular corpus of material evidence includes inscriptions, coins, and archaeology, including archaeological objects and also archaeological techniques. Of course, there's a lot of art and architecture that flourished in this area, this period, particularly the cave temples, the rock-cut cave architecture of Deccan almost entirely sort of takes off in this period. So very much there's a lot of visual evidence in that kind of art, and also not to forget the monumental art of very important Buddhist sites such as Amaravati, Nagarjunakonda, and lately Kanaganahalli in Karnataka is very much evocative of this particular period. Much like literary evidence, material evidence also comes with its own limitations. The main limitations the material evidence presents is that it is not documented properly. Often in places like India, the finds don't get reported correctly or in accurate manner, whatever. So there is a lot of the reporting of these sites and these artifacts is quite patchy. And then there are interpretative problems, and everyone has a particular discourse that they fit into the stories about how to interpret these objects, how to interpret particular phrases in the inscriptions, for example, or indeed how to interpret certain objects that are found in archaeological excavations, depending on their stratigraphy, depending on their manufacturing technique. There is a lot of difference in interpretation. So in a nutshell, the Satavahana studies sort of begin in late 19th century when there were early histories written by early stalwarts like Vincent Smith and Ramakrishna Gopal Bhandarkar. In a lot of these early stories, the Satavahanas are called Andhra. Now, this is a very contentious term, as you can imagine. This is mainly because in a lot of Puranas, the name is always, the dynasty is always referred to as the Andhra dynasty. Then the word Satavahana doesn't actually really come into the Puranas at all for a long time. As against that, in antiquities and archaeology, the term Andhra is never ever applied to this dynasty. It's always the Satavahanas or something which is slightly similar to that. The early antiquarian explorations and surveys on Satavahana sites was done by, again, late 19th century stalwarts like Bhagwan Lal Indraji, Henry Cousins, James Burgess, and James Ferguson. Particularly for Burgess, Ferguson, and Indraji, there was the epigraphy that was very important. They went documenting cave temples and the inscriptions in those cave temples, and they sort of, for the first time, they read the names of these guys, these kings, the Satavahana kings, into that. Later, their corpus was far more accentuated, debated upon, chewed over upon, and many times bitterly so by epigraphical doyens like V.V. Mirashi and D.C. Sarkar. Numismatics has found a very important basis for Satavahana studies ever since, again, in the late 19th centuries. The first one to collect Satavahana coins, particularly from the coastal regions of Andhra Pradesh, was the British civilians like Alexander Ree and Eliot. And then they subsequently were expounded upon and written upon by Hulch, who was a very eminent German Indologist. In 1907, a considerable number of Satavahana and Andhra, as they call it, coins were documented in the British Museum collection, and a catalogue was published by Edward James Rapson. So Rapson was definitely one of the first persons to actually understand certain characteristics. We'll come to that in a minute. Certain characteristics that the coinage possessed. In 20th century, the debates about Satavahanas were dominated by the scholarly activities of V.V. Mirashi, D.C. Sarkar, and lately in the 1970s and 80s, or 60s and 70s and 80s by Parmeshwari Lal Gupta and Ajay Mitra Shastri. In addition to that, to this kind of stellar galaxy of primary and very well-known scholars, there are lots of other literature that was produced in secondary sort of levels by reports in archaeology and small articles in various journals, etc. And it was R.K. Sharma, Parabrahma Shastri, and Raja Reddy and Surya Narayan Reddy. And this is, for the sake of brevity, I call them Reddy and Reddy, because otherwise the pronunciation of their names becomes far too much at every time I pronounce them. The main reason why the scholarly world was interested in Satavahanas was because they are a controversial dynasty. We know that in sort of after the death of Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire fragmented. But we really don't know how it fragmented. There is no chronology, or there is no process of knowing, or at least in traditional narratives, there is nothing said about how it fragmented, what happened exactly. The traditional narrative, as I said, sort of veers down to the linear narrative, which is produced in the Puranas, that the Shungas take over, then after that the Khanvas take over, and whatever. The main sticking point in 20th century sort of politicization of this debate was, is this dynasty Andhra, as the Puranas mention it, or is it Maharashtrian in a way? It's a very silly, on the face of it, it's a very silly kind of debate, because in 1st century BC, or whenever, these geographical, geopolitical entities called Andhra Pradesh or Telangana or Maharashtra did not really exist. But obviously in 20th century, when these identities became very pointed and sometimes polarized, people had been debating with where is the origin of this dynasty. This is a kind of story very similar to the birth of Buddha, and how India and Nepal are sort of contesting over where exactly was the Buddha born. Was it in the Indian side of the border or on the Nepalese side of the border? Of course, India and Nepal as nation states did not exist in 4th century BC at all, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the current politics of the debate. When exactly Satavahana rule started is another sticking point, and here there are two distinct views that were expressed by many scholars. The first view was that Satavahanas started ruling immediately after the reign of Ashoka in 2nd century BC. And the that is not as what the Puranas describe. So there's a discrepancy. The Puranas describe the Andhras, or the Satavahanas as they call them, to have gained ascendancy after the Kanvas. So that becomes about 70 BC, so kind of mid first century BC. So there is, so some people say they started in third century or late second century BC, and some people say they started in the mid first century BC. So the end of the dynasty around 250 AD is by and large kind of agreed upon. So we know that the Satavahanas sort of phased out by about 250 AD. So judging by the differences in the starting of the chronologies, you get two chronologies here. There's a long chronology, which is about 500 or ish years, and there is a slightly shorter chronology, which is about 350 odd years. How does the Puranic genealogy and chronology map onto these two chronologies is a completely different aspect, and I shall not get into that because it becomes a matter of another lecture. Other sticking points were the order and chronology of rulers. Now, very interestingly, there is a discrepancy between what the literary evidence, what the textual evidence tells us about the Satavahanas and what the material evidence tells us about the Satavahanas. There are some characters which are mentioned in both. Then there are some characters which we know only from the material evidence, but not reflected in the textual evidence, and vice versa. There are some guys who get mentioned in the Puranas or any such textual evidence, but there is no trace of them in the material component of the evidence. The chronology of the events is also very much debating. The expansion and contraction of the empire. As I said at the very beginning, the empire seems to have gone through two phases of expansion. So it expands immediately in sort of second century, first century BC period after it was founded, and then it contracts. Then there's a kind of a splitting, fragmenting kind of phase, and then around first century AD, particularly the latter half of first century AD, it starts expanding again. So how exactly that particular things happen? There are certain aspects that the earlier scholars were completely fascinated by, but currently it's not so politically correct, I would imagine. So those are the debates which are about caste and the Varna. Were the Satavahanas Brahmins or not, or were they Kshatriyas or not, or whatever, those kind of things. The other thing was, of course, location of their center of power. Was it, again, this sort of feeds back into the Andhra versus Maharashtra debate. Was the capital located in Andhra Pradesh, in Dharanikota, near Nagarjunakonda, or was it Paitan in Maharashtra? So again, this is something which is not particularly significant in my view. When there are other debates like whether they were matrilineal, because a lot of these Satavahana kings have prefixes to their names which mention that they are sons of a particular mother of a particular gotra. So was this a reflection of their matrilinearity in their order of succession? And one would wonder, why exactly are these things important? Now, because the minor controversies are not that significant, as I've just said, but it's mainly important to understand all sorts of cultural and political developments of this time, which have a huge bearing on our understanding of, say, the initial part of Indian art, or the processes of socio-economic processes like urbanization, and what sort of political debates and struggles were going on around that. Very significantly, what sort of commerce was going on in the first century AD. We shall see later that the Roman trade starts sort of operating in a major way and has a huge impact on the commerce and trade aspects in peninsular India. So these are very, very crucial and very important points that help our understanding of ancient India in a great way. So this is why Satavahanas are important. This is why, because the Satavahanas, under their aegis of that dynasty, everything at this time happened. So this is why it makes Satavahanas extremely significant. Telling you about what the evidence structure is, let us come back to the numismatics of Satavahana period. And the first thing that I would like to point out in terms of how the numismatic evidence can be used to understand these various processes, the historical processes of the Satavahana period, is that we have to agree that we have to give primacy to material evidence. And amongst the material evidence, the numismatic evidence is by far the most extensive of the evidences. And it requires certain methods to decode it. So what are those methods? And I'll talk a little bit about those methods. The application of these numismatic methods to, and the kind of utility of coins to decode what history lies behind them is very significant in this matter. Of course, we can't really depend only on coins. I mean, we can't say that coins are most important or anything of that sort. We have to be interdisciplinary about it, and we have to seek corroborations from other aspects of evidence. And here again, I would say that the secondary corroborations should come from other components of material evidence. And tertiary corroborations, the third level of corroborations, if at all they need to be sought, we can seek them from literary evidence. So this is the primary kind of methodological outlook that one has to adopt to see how material evidence fits into literary evidence. And I'll tell you why this is important, because so far the debate that has been going on about this this period and the evidence structure does not actually grapple with this problem. I said that there is discrepancy between literary evidence and material evidence. Mentions are made which are there in one part of the evidence and not in the other part of the evidence. And people haven't really actually taken those on board. They have said, okay, if a certain king is not mentioned in the Puranas but mentioned on coins, that's where sort of factually they leave it. They said no, they don't actually try to make sense it. So if this is so, then where do we what is the historical quote unquote truth about it? Where does the fact lie? Nobody knows what it is. So this is why we have to sort of change the outlook a little bit and give primacy to certain bodies of evidence and see what actually comes out. The Satavahana coinage is a very characteristic coinage. First of all, there are lots of Satavahana coins. So the issuance under the Satavahanas of coins was profuse. Very, very many Satavahana coins were issued. And the other advantage that we have is that most of them are extensively inscribed. So to start with, we actually know who the person issuing this coin or who the coin is issued in the name of which person. That is quite important. They use Prakrit language and Brahmi script to write these inscriptions. A vast majority of the Satavahana coins are made of base metal, and such as alloys, and their alloys such as copper, lead, bronze, and mixed metals. And sometimes numismatists use this word potin, which is a kind of mixed metal between lead, copper, and bronze, and lead, copper, and tin. Comparatively rarer are Satavahana silver issues. I say comparatively because once upon a time they were considered to be absolutely rarest of the rare, and people were writing articles like the second coin of Yajnashri Satakani, the third coin of Yajnashri Satakani, whatever. Now, of course, there's a massive number of silver coins of Satavahanas is known. Having said that, they're still quite limited in comparison to the base metal range that we know. The base metal range is really vast. There is a large number of types. So this is a numismatic definition here. The type is actually what the coin shows you. It has an elephant on it, it has an inscription on it, it has various characters such as weight, fabric, metal, method of manufacture. All this contribute to a numismatic type. And the last and the most important characteristic that the coinage possesses is that the types show a marked regional orientation with respect to their distribution. I'll come back to that in a minute. I have labeled this particular phenomenon as regiospecificity. I have shamelessly appropriated this term from organic chemistry, where it describes a particular kind of reaction. However, it suits our purpose very well. So in terms of describing this particular phenomenon, there cannot be a better word. So what is regiospecificity? As I said, the coin type is composed of motifs, legends, fabric, metals, whatever the coin actually possesses. In this way, these are the intrinsic variables that one uses while studying coins. So these are variables which are intrinsic to the coin itself. Provenance, where coins have been found, is an extrinsic variable. So this is not exactly embedded in the coin itself, but it is something that we know about the coins from external sources. Coins are found in many ways. Coins are found as hoards, coins are found as stray finds. There are archaeological deposits, and in particularly important for Satavahanas is scavenging by professional gold washer communities, which are present in every village in Maharashtra near ancient sites, particularly, and they pan in the river or the water body for little specks of gold, and this is when they find coins as well. So this is a very important source for the appearance of Satavahana coins, particularly in this time. So what happens when we overlap this extrinsic and the intrinsic variables together? We get to study the type vis-a-vis the provenance, and this gives you a kind of a distribution of coin types. So if the coin type is, say, lion, or if the coin type is, say, elephant, when you put it together with the provenance where these coins are found, you can say that, oh, well, this is a lion type from Vidarbha, or this is a lion type from South Maharashtra, or wherever. So, and this kind of orientation that one sees in the types and their distributions is what I call as regiospecificity. So what characterizes a particularly regiospecific coin type? First and foremost, the coin types, and it need not be a single type, it can be a multiple types, but they are found, usually encountered within a definable geographic locus. So there is a geographical patch of land in which they are found. They almost never travel to other regions. There are some exceptions to this, but my classic example is coins which are found in Junar and coins which are found in Nasik, for example. These two places are 100 kilometers apart, but very rarely are coins from Junar encountered in Nasik and vice versa, very, very rarely. There is an identifiable flavor in intrinsic variables. So like motifs and fabrics, one can take a look and you can actually judge a particular coin type by the way the certain things such as animals or letter forms or symbolic deployments of various symbols on them is used. You can see that it has a particular flavor. The elephant type from Nevasa looks very different from the elephant type from, say, Vidarbha, or indeed from southern Madhya Pradesh or somewhere like that. So these coins, they have a distinctive look, particularly in of course, it has distinctive fabric, distinctive weights as well. This suggests that they are part of a regionally oriented monetary system. They are used within this region, within these kind of little pockets. And this is true because each region is identified by at least one contemporary urban center. So coins of the Junar types are actually found in Junar, which is a well-known Satavahana urban center. We know that because there are so many, there's an archaeological basis for saying this. And this sort of thing fits in with the story of how the entire region was urbanized. So when these urban centers proliferated, they generated their own monetary nuclei, as it were, and that's where these coins were functioning. And this is what they were servicing. The local monetary economy of those flourishing urban centers was serviced by regiospecific coin types. This is a map that shows us the distribution of regional centers and kind of regions that give rise to regiospecific coin types. So these are little sort of pockets in which certain kind of coins are found and certain types are concentrated. Some of the areas, as you can see, are quite big. So for example, numbers 13, 14, 15, 16 are in Vidarbha, and that's a kind of a big area. Similarly, numbers 27, 28, 29, 30, 31 is coastal Andhra Pradesh, and that's again a kind of big area. It is possible to determine or sort of separate these into further smaller areas. It is possible. I haven't done that exercise now because when I constructed this map about 20 years ago, there was not much information about these. But now, for example, at least in Vidarbha, we know that there are this map can be populated even better. So there are all these places, Ujjain, Vidisha, Mallar, blah, blah, blah. There are 33 different places where, and not all of these places are yielding regiospecific coin types. So most of them are, as you can see from the areas that are shown. how does one use this particular phenomenon as a tool for historical reconstruction? Coins are most significant because they act as tools that offer us methods to see, recreate, reconstruct history. That's what their main fun is. So the identifying types and regions, again, I have given primacy to this particular thing. Then, as I said, each region with the presence of the contemporary thriving urban center is a kind of monetary microcosm or a numismatic microcosm. This gives us a kind of picture where numismatic types of particular coins are circulating. When you apply other well-established numismatic methodologies, such as studying the type characteristics and how they are continued and transmitted and successive in under successive political authorities. Also, very significantly, counterstriking of coins. These are very well established numismatic methodologies. When they are applied into each of these microcosms, we get a kind of picture of series. It can be a type series, it can be a regional series, or it can be an issuer series, whoever issues these coins. So these series then can be subjected to identifying further markers of study, such as the dating of this series, who are the issuers, and historical chronology of what actually this series tells us. And then we can corroborate that with epigraphy, archaeology, and other branches of historical evidence. So within each of these microcosms, you get a picture of, you can construct a picture of what is going on politically. And you put all the 33 regions together and you get the entire picture. That is in a nutshell. Of course, it was not that easy. It is fraught with lots of difficulties, but this is in essence what it is. As I said before, the picture that we get from coins about how the politics of the region, particularly of Deccan, was mapping out after the Mauryans, we get a very different story. We don't get anything Shunga, we don't get anything Kanva. Instead of that, we get a lot of new and practically unknown from any other source kings and queens and their coinages. So we have, for example, we know of a king called Kutapada, whose coins have been struck in Marathwada, western Vidarbha, and up to about Nevasa in sort of central parts of Maharashtra. In Vidarbha, of course, we have the Bhadra and Mitra dynasties, and also other kings such as Subena, whose example I've shown here on the top left. These are distinctively, the coin types are very distinctive here. And in the same picture, you have coins, the early Satavahana coins, such as the ones issued by Chimuka or Simuka, who was the progenitor of the dynasty. We know from coins that he had also had a matronymic, and his full name was Kosikiputa Simuka. I must say that I'm kind of averse to using Sanskrit words here, because the kings themselves don't use any of the Sanskrit on their coins. So I'm inclined to say Vasitiputa rather than Vasishtiputra, or Satakani rather than Satakarni, or Shatakarni, which is even worse, I think. So I'm trying to fix my pronunciations and references to the Prakrit versions, which are what we see on coins. Chimuka was followed by Satakarni or Satakani on coins, and Sati Siri, both these characters we know from coins, and their coins are known from certain areas, which is mainly to the north of the northern half of Maharashtra. It is quite interesting that coins of these rulers are not really found in the southern parts. They are not found in South Maharashtra or Karnataka or Telangana, for that matter. Mainly, they're found in Nasik, particularly in the regions of Malwa. They again adopt the coin from Malwa that you see here, top right, is a punch mark copper coin. It's just exactly in the same fashion as the current coins from Vidisha and Eastern Malwa in that region. We also have Satavahana rule extending to Tripuri, which is near Jabalpur, sort of very far eastern part of Malwa. And we have particular coin type. This is called the human figure type of Sri Sati. As you can see on the coin on obverse, we can see there's a standing human figure. And on the reverse, there is an elephant and a 3-arched hill. Similarly, you have their coins also in Vidarbha. They were followed by rulers which were called Kochhiputa and Kosikiputa Satakarni. But before that, we have an instance where we, for the first time, have coins issued by the name in the name of a queen, and this is the first instance in the entire dynastic chronology of India where a name of a queen, indigenous queen. Of course, there are Bactrian queens, Greek queens, which feature on coins, but this is the first instance where the name of an Indian queen appears on coins. And the name actually appears inscribed on a vertical pillar, which is set in a railing. And this is something new. I mean, most of the times these coins are described where the name of the queen, which is in the center, says Naganika, is supposed to be in a tablet, which is usually shown horizontal. But I am kind of convinced about the fact now that this is actually a pillar on top of which there is a small figure of a horse. So most likely these coins were issued as commemoratives of the horse sacrifice. We know that from Naganika's inscription, which is in the Naneghat caves, that she and her husband performed the horse sacrifice. And these coins are struck in their joint names. So there's the name of Siri Satakani, who was her husband, and the name of Naganika. So the name of Naganika is actually inscribed on a pillar vertically, which stands in a railing, and on top of that there is a little figure of a horse. On both these coins, on the rectangular coin, you can barely make out the horse's face and his four legs, but the four legs are also very clear on the round coin of this particular kind. So this is a very significant numismatic feature that happens at this time. The coins of Kochhiputa and Kosikiputa, now both these kings are not referred to in the dynastic lists in the Puranas. Again, they are distributed in specific geographic regions. So we have coins of Kochhiputa from Nasik and Nevasa Paitan, and also from northern Maharashtra, from the Prakasha region. Kosikiputa, on the other hand, has coins which are from the south and the east of the region. So they are in Nevasa, they are in Vidarbha, but he does not have coins which are struck in the far north of Maharashtra, for example. He does have coins struck in Nasik. What exactly the chronological order of these kings is still a bit uncertain, but they are quite happily put in very early sort of 1st century BC kind of bracket. So they definitely follow Siri, Satakani, and Naganika, and they have again very specific distribution of coin types. In the 1st century AD, something very interesting happens, and it is marked by, as I said, the fragmentation of the dynasty. So after these early, the dynasty appears to have gone a kind of a decline in its fortunes. And in and around 1st century, middle of 1st century AD, we see a conflict developing, and the fortunes of the Satavahanas are eclipsed by the rise of another competing dynasty. That competing dynasty and the key competing players are the Kshatrapa ruler of Gujarat, whose name was Nahapana, and the Satavahana ruler Gautamiputra Satakani. We know of this conflict very clearly from inscriptional details in Nasik and Karla caves. There are inscriptions written there both by Nahapana, mainly by his son-in-law, that mention that he had established his rule in that point. Then there are inscriptions which actually talk about that the Shaharata rule had been passed. It was a past thing. So, for example, a particular inscription in Karla mentions that a field that was donated to the monastery, Gautamiputra Satakani mentions that this field once belonged to Nahapana. So that now, and so he's continuing the donation, but he says that it once belonged to Nahapana. So that kind of political interface between these two authorities is very clearly marked in these inscriptions. The eulogy of Gautamiputra, which is inscribed in Nasik caves, mentions him as the exterminator of the Kshatrapa race. So this is again a very clear indication that there was conflict, and the Satavahanas then come out as winners in this conflict. Some Indian texts like the Kalaka Acharya Kathanaka, the Jain text, mentions of this particular rivalry, saying that there was a king of Titan, there was a king of Bharuch in Gujarat, and there was this particular rivalry between them and how it plays out. Periplus of the Erythraean Sea has a very interesting insight into it, and it mentions Nambanus, which is, we know, is Nahapan. We know somebody called Sandanis, which we can't place at the moment, but we know somebody called Elder Sarganis. And this is a reference to the older brother of Gautamiputra Satakani. Sarganis is, of course, a kind of a Greekification or Romanization of the word Satakani. And we know that Gautamiputra was preceded by another Gautamiputra who was his older brother. So he was obviously being called as Elder Satakani. And then there are other lots of specific details, such as, don't go into this port because there is warfare going on, and all the ships which are trying to be entering into this port are then surrounded by other ships and then taken to another port. And this is supposed to be a reference to the conflict, that all the incoming trade was being actually actively diverted as a result of this conflict. Of course, the most important evidence to this conflict are coins, and we see coins emerging as the main evidence in two distinct different ways. One is how successive types, as I said, within these little numismatic microcosms, you can construct series of issuing authorities. So what is very significant is that the overall appearance of the coin is not really changed that drastically, but we have key elements which are kind of changed. And so the examples are quite interesting, and this is what I call as type succession. So these are two coins of Nasic type elephant, and you can see that by and large they are of a similar type. There's an elephant on one side and a tree in railing on the other side. In the Satavahana coins, on just above the back of the elephant, there is a particular symbol, and this symbol was recognized as a dynastic emblem of the Satavahanas. The type remains practically the same. Execution is slightly different, but the type remains practically the same. But you can see that in Nahapanas coins, which is on the top right here, that particular dynastic emblem, which is replaced by a dynastic emblem of the Nahapanas, of Nahapanas dynasty, the Kshaharatas. There is a thunderbolt and an arrow. So that replaces this particular symbol, which numismatists kind of popularly called as the Ujjain symbol, because it was originally discovered on the coins of Ujjain first. So the Ujjain symbol here is replaced by the markers of Nahapanas dynasty. So this is how you can see the conflict sort of unfolding in numismatic terms. Similarly, in coins of Junar, you can see that, again, the main type remains the same. If you see the lower two coins, the execution of the lion is practically the same. What changes is the motif on the reverse. Here again, you can see that there is this Ujjain symbol, which was kind of associated dynastically with the Satavahanas. It has now been changed to the thunderbolt and arrow and a bow and arrow symbol by Nahapana. So you can see that the type remains the same, but the issuing authority differs. So this is a very clear indication of what was going on politically within the regionalized monetary microcosms of Nasik and Junar. And this is a classic example of how numismatic developments in these regio-specific areas can be looked into as tools to construct history. The evidence of counterstriking is absolutely crucial in this, and this has been very well known. In 1906, there was a large hoard of these coins found in a place called Jogalti, which is near Nasik, and a vast majority of Nahapana silver coins were actually counterstruck by the Satavahana king Gautamiputra Satakani. And this was, again, in the context of the political milieu of the times, was translated as, Satavahanas are the indigenous ruling elite, the Shakas are foreigners, and this is the Gautamiputra then sort of appears as a kind of regional nationalist hero who vanquishes the foreigners. And of course, this has got lots of repercussions into what was happening around 1904, 1905, 1906, Swadeshi movement, etc. And obviously the reflection of contemporary politics was definitely very much seen in this story. This was not exactly the whole story by itself, because now we know that the reverse order of counterstriking also happened. So it was not just the Satavahanas counterstriking the Kshatrapa coins, but the Kshatrapas also counterstruck Satavahana coins. So this was a kind of an ongoing and developing dynamic rather than a one-off nationalist resurgence on the parts of the Satavahanas. And of course, the real reason behind this was practical, not exactly ideological, because it was easier to have already made coins then used as blanks to be put with new devices on. It saves money, it saves labor, so it's a very intensive, labor-intensive method of putting coins in use again with a different issuing authority. The chronology of the conflict reveals us to something which actually acts as a kind of a main anchor for understanding the entire chronology of the Satavahana. So this is our main nail in the ladder of how, whether we go backwards or forwards in terms of constructing or giving a view on Satavahana chronology. We know that from the inscriptions that the last year of reign of Nahapana was 46. We know there is an inscription dated regnal year 46 in a cave in Junnar, and we know nothing after that. There is probably 46 was his sort of last year or thereabouts. We also know that the mention of in an inscription of Gautamiputra defeating Nahapana, the earliest mention comes in the 18th year of Gautamiputra Satakani. And this is exactly the same reference that I just told you about. This is the field being mentioned, that in the 18th year, this inscription was carved, and he says, in 18th year, this field was once belonging to Nahapana. So Nahapana by 18th year, it's definitely not there. So when Nahapana dies, or when he's no more on the political picture, his secondary king, which was called Kshatrapa, and Nahapana at this time had become a Mahakshatrapa. He'd assumed the higher title because he was a kind of a major king, and this was what the Scythian Kshatrapas did. When they became important, they assumed the higher title of Mahakshatrapa. But when the Mahakshatrapa title was employed, the Mahakshatrapa also appointed a secondary king under him called Kshatrapa. So the secondary king under Nahapana was this guy called Chashtana, and as Nahapana goes off the political picture, he assumes the higher title of Mahakshatrapa, and this must have happened after the death of Nahapana. Now we know that the inception of Chashtana's rule is what we continue to use as the Shaka era. And Shaka era starts in 78 AD. So this particular change in Chashtana's political fortunes must have happened in 78 AD. So Nahapana must have died in 78 AD or a little bit before that for this thing to have happened. So when we rest our faith into this hypothesis, this is a hypothesis. Let me be clear about it. There is no concrete evidence to this. This is a hypothesis. But when we rest our faith onto this hypothesis, we know that Nahapana's rule is somehow about 33 to 78 AD. Similarly, Gautamiputra Satakani's reign should be about 60 to 84 AD, because we know from other inscriptions that he ruled for at least 24 years. So 78 minus 18 gives us 60. So that's probably the rule, the year in which he started ruling, and then carried on to about 80, 84, 85 AD. And into this whole story is fitted the date of Periplus, which is somewhere around 50 to 60 AD. Now, I tell this in a great contracted manner. There are other evidences to this story. And I said, although there is a caveat for suggesting that this is a hypothesis, the main reason why I tend to believe the hypothesis is because if you rest your chronology on this particular fulcrum, much of later things, much of other things, much of other chronologies start making sense. So it must be more or less true. It's not absolutely true to the dot, but it must be more or less true. So this is what understanding the conflict of the Kshatrapas and the Satavahanas and situating the coins within it gives us. This is a very important historical piece of information. What happens after the conflict is also the Satavahanas start issuing their own silver coins for the first time. By this time, there is a lot of silver which is coming into the country through the Roman trade. We know, and it has been metallurgically proven, that Nahapana's coins were actually made from incoming Roman silver coins, and there is a kind of a metallurgical signature between these two coins that tell us that they were both made from the same source of silver. This influx into the local markets of the Deccan with silver coins actually created a very interesting picture, because now for the first time there was a metal that everyone could trust and everybody could accept available once again. Before that, there were no silver source, there was no silver supply into this region. And this actually marks the end of the beginning of the regio-specific coins. Now, with the universality of acceptance of silver coins, the regional coins that we see, the regional types and the regional economies that we see using regional coin types, those start declining. More and more of these trading centers opt for the use of widely accepted silver coins, such as this one. And this coin is more significant than that, because this is the first time ever that we see that Satavahanas actually start using pure Sanskrit in their inscriptions. This is not this here. The name is written as Gautami Putrasya Shri Satakarnyaha. So this is a pure Sanskrit rendering of the inscription of Gautami Putra. And this is quite interesting because we find, and as recently Andrew Ollett in his fantastic book about the history of Prakrit has shown, that this is the dynamic at about 4th century AD. We find Sanskrit coming into inscriptional repertoire more forcefully, slowly displacing the Prakrit elements. And this is the coin is a kind of testimony to that. They also issue, for the first time again, their own silver portrait coins. Now, these are modeled on the prototypes of Western Kshatrapa silver coins. Really, they have an obverse, which has a portrait of the king. They have a reverse, which has a dynastic emblem in the center. And they have inscriptions in 2 different languages. These are the very basic of Western Kshatrapa coin characteristics that the Satavahanas adopt. And from the reign of Vasisthiputra Pulumavi, the coinage is struck in with the king's portrait. These portraits are fairly realistic, as I can say, because frankly speaking, these kings are not really good to look at. they are quite ugly kings, and they of course show themselves in whatever the reality was. Then they don't show themselves as a kind of idealized portrait having beautiful eyes, and much like the Guptas did later on. These are I would not say that they're realistic portraits, but they are true to realism of how the kings actually looked. They have long ears, and they have these very heavy ear ornaments that they use. A lot of them have on their head this particular flower-like thing just above their forehead, which has been rendered as mentioned to be a chudamani, or some sort of head ornament that was used by the kings. There are 2 inscriptions on this. The inscription on the obverse is in Prakrit, which is called Maharashtri Prakrit. This is amongst the 5 different languages of Prakrit. This was one of the variations of Prakrit. The inscription on the reverse, there is a lot of debate on exactly which language it is in. Some people say it is Telugu, some people say it is Tamil, whatever. It is absolutely certain that the inscription is inscribed in the southern variant of Brahmi, and most likely this particular kind of inscription language and script was used in Andhra Pradesh. So it is from the southern parts of Satavahana domains. What happens after the reign of Gautamiputra Satakani is that his son Vasithiputta Pulumavi then expands the empire massively. I mean, he claims and he attributes all the glories to his father very nicely in the eulogy that he writes at Nasik, but he was the real Napoleon, I would say, in Satavahanas, because he was the person who actually expanded the boundaries to a great extent. One important thing that had happened in Nahapana, in the Satavahana and Nahapana conflict, is that a lot of the feudatories of Satavahanas, the families which were ruling under them as sub-rulers, we'll come to their coins in a minute, had changed alliances. And one of the things that Vasitiputta Pulumavi does is that he puts an end to most of these subsidiary dynasties, and he sort of centralizes the Satavahana empire into a kind of a single political entity. There were these officials, but there is room to believe that their freedoms were very much curtailed in this first century BC period, first century AD period. Sorry. Just a quick glance through all sorts of all kings that issued silver portrait coins. So here we see examples of Vasitiputta Pulumavi on the top, Vasitiputta Siri Satakani at the bottom, example of Vasitiputta Siva Siri Pulumavi, Vasitiputta Siri Khada Satakani or Skanda Satakani, as in Sanskrit form he was known. Example of Vasitiputta Vijaya Satakani and Gotamiputta Siri Yajna Satakani. We see that between Gotamiputta Siri Satakani and Gotamiputta Siri Yajna Satakani, there were about 5 kings who had the metronymic Vasitiputta. And there is a kind of belief that they were all brothers, but I don't know how to believe that, because it's impossible for 5 uterine brothers to rule in succession for nearly a century. It's impossible. Some of them were definitely sons and offsprings of the previous Vasitiputtas, and I have discussed this in detail in my thesis about what the exact order of progression amongst these rulers was. Apart from Gautamiputra Sri Yajna Satakani, who was a major ruler after, probably the greatest ruler after Gautamiputra Siri Satakani and Vasitiputta Siri Pulumavi, we have now found examples of the very late Satavahana rulers issuing portrait coins as well. And these are 2 examples. The first one is Madhariputta Siri Pulumavi, who's probably called as Pulumavi the Third or Pulumavi the Fourth. And now he's recently been known from an inscription that was dated in his reign, known from the stupa site at Kanaganahalli. And the last coin here is of Gautamiputra Siri Kubha Satakani or Kumbha Satakani, who was one of the very last of the Satavahana rulers. So the practice of issuing silver portrait coins carried on till the very end of the dynasty in amongst the Satavahanas. Here are some examples of the later Satavahana coin types. Now, I said that with the advent of the silver coinage, the regio-specific characteristic of Satavahana coin starts declining. But that doesn't mean that it kind of actually vanishes altogether. It very much survives in the coastal parts of Andhra Pradesh and the sort of southern, southeastern parts of the Satavahana Empire. So these are examples of some late regio-specific types, such as one you see at Banavasi in central Karnataka. Vidarbha, of course, carries on issuing regio-specific coin types. And this one particular thing, which has got this hill with a shankha shell and a lotus next to it, prominent Vaishnavite emblems appearing for the first time on Satavahana coins. This shows that how the religious movements in these Satavahana territories were also making an impact, and how they are reflected in these coins. So this is a coin from coastal Andhra Pradesh, a hill type with shankha and lotus on either side. These are some of the examples, kind of a map showing in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh where the concentration of regio-specific coin types are. So there are 4 areas here. One is kind of northern Telangana, one is kind of western Telangana and eastern Karnataka. Then the third is Rayalaseema, which is south western Andhra Pradesh and coastal Andhra Pradesh. Each of these still towards the end, even in the end of the Satavahana dynasty, do produce regio-specific coin types. Quickly showing some examples. Northern Telangana, the typical sites that produce Northern Telangana coins are Kotalingala, where it sort of has this interesting small size copper coins. which are kind of derived from types which were circulating in Vidarbha. So it's a spillover of coin types from Vidarbha that one sees circulating in northern Telangana. The types are kind of related as well. In southwestern Telangana, or the Bhima Valley, which has been characterized by the recently famous site of Sannati and an equally famous site which was excavated in the 1950s, which is Kondapur. So this kind of Kondapur Sannati belt has these particular coins of elephant type, and on the reverse there is the Ujjain symbol with one of the circles modified with a crescent. Now this is the typical essence of Satavahana dynastic emblem. Another very profuse coin, which is a type which is found in the Bhima Valley, is the arched hill type. And sometimes you have 3 arched hill here, sometimes you have 6 arched hill. And here the inscription is written reading sort of anti-clockwise outwards. This is another very interesting feature. So it starts at about 3 o'clock, proceeds outwardly reading anti-clockwise, and simple legends such as Ranyo, Siri, Satakani, sir. And here it is interesting to know that this Satakani is not the first Satakani that we saw, who was the 1st century BC Satakani. This is a reference to Gautamiputra Siri Satakani, or one of his successors, which were called Satakani, but without the mention of their metronymic. So this is a kind of a 1st century AD onwards coinage. And the fact that this has not been understood by a lot of historians and art historians who are working on these sites has meant that there's a lot of confusion about the exact chronology of art in these sites as well. Some examples of coastal Andhra Pradesh coin types: Shri Yanya Satakani and Shri Chanda Sati, who was again a kind of a late Satavahana ruler, mainly confined to the coastal parts of Andhra Pradesh. The top coin is elephant type, and the 2 lower coins are horse type. Here, the one on the left is Yajna Satakani, and on the right is Siri Chada Satakani. All these coins are from the collection of the British Museum, and they were collected very earlier on by Walter Elliot and Alexander Ree from the coastal Andhra sites. So quite significant in terms of understanding early Satavahana numismatics. As I said, the Satavahanas had feudatories under them, and they were sort of title holders, some of which seem to have had rights to issue their own coins. So there are various characters known. So there are titles such as Mahagramika, Mahasenapati, Mahabhoja, Mahatalavara, Maharathi, Gami Kumara, Mahagami Kumara, loads and loads of different titles. And a lot of these have issued these coins. Again, in the earlier period, sort of up to about mid-1st century AD, these also, pretty much like the parent imperial coinages, show a very distinct regio-specific characteristic. So, for example, the top coin here is a Mahagramika coin. It says Mahagamika in Brahmi above this elephant, which is shown here with a trunk upraised. And this is from Vidarbha. It sort of matches, in general, typology and fabric with other Satavahana coins from Vidarbha. The coin at the bottom, the lead coin with a turtle on them, is of Mahabhoja, and I've done another presentation on the coinages and the importance of the coins of Mahabhojas. And these were coastal ruling entities known mainly from inscriptions at the cave temple complex at Kuda in Konkan, just south of Bombay. Similarly, on the right-hand side, there is a coin of a guy called Maharathi Samata, whose coins are known from Nevasa down to Karad in Western Maharashtra region. So various areas of the landscape had these, again, very specific coin types with different ruling authorities showing them. The Mahatalavaras were mainly in the Andhra part, the Telangana part of the empire, and quite earlier on, V.V. Merashi published this coin of a ruler called Siva Sebaka, and he was a Mahatalavara known from other coins, and they were found originally in coastal Andhra Pradesh. But now recently, the excavations at Fanigiri, which is an absolutely fantastic historic site of the middle Satavahana period, located in Karimnagar district in Telangana, which has yielded this horde of Mahatalavara, whose name was Vaji Samika Balakata. And these Mahatalavaras call themselves as Vaji Samika, the lord of the horses. And quite interestingly, the main emblem of on their coin is also of a standing horse. So very kind of interesting linkage between what their identity in terms of their religious or inclination was, and what their coins actually depict. I did my thesis on Satavahana coins about maybe 20 years ago now. And at that time, the picture about the decline of the dynasty was not very clear, or shall I, dare I say, that now we know better about what was happening towards the end of the Satavahanas. So what happens, how the dynasty ends. So we know that it's fragmented. This is what I had said. And we have certain rulers such as Chanda Sati, for example, or Kumbha Satakani ruling in different parts, and they probably ruled simultaneously, overlapping slightly with each other. And after Yadnya Satakani, the empire seems to have gone to dogs, really, and something again splits. And then in various political and regional pockets, we have different political authorities sort of asserting itself. So in coastal Andhra Pradesh, we know the Ikshvakus take over the Satavahanas. And a vestige of the Satavahana rules, now we know from coins, was retained in the terms of a dynasty which was called the Lesser Satavahanas. They call them the Chutu Kula, the smaller family of the Satavahanas. And in the inscriptions of the Ikshvakus, we find them mentioned by the term Vanavasaka Maharajas, because their capital, their main seat of power, was Banavasi, which is present-day Banavasi in Shimoga district in Karnataka. And this is where the dynasty sort of lingered a little bit. And we know a lot of new kings and the new sort of coins from this particular period now. And we know that there was a king called Vinukada Chutukulananda Satakani at this time, and he's known also from a couple of inscriptions that bear his name and his regnal. But we also know a lot of other kings, such as, for example, Hariti Putrasi Mahamulananda. This is a new king, completely known only from coins. We know of Sivalananda, and we know that he also had the metronymic Hariti Putra, and he was called Siri Sivalananda. Siri Sivalananda, by the way, also finds a mention in one of the Ikshvaku inscriptions. So the Ikshvakus had matrimonial relationships with these Vanavasaka Maharajas. So we have about 5 or 6 of these Vanavasaka Maharajas known. All of them carry on calling themselves the Satavahanas or the Satakanis of the lesser family. There is room to believe that one of the queens of Vasitiputa Pulumavi actually came from this region, because there is a memorial stone of her still preserved in the compound of Madhukeshwara temple in Banavasi. So it must have perhaps found somewhere locally and then brought to the temple and deposited there. But we know that one of his queens came from this region. And probably, who knows, this is a guess, the dynasty had its origins in this particular matrimonial link. That queen does not seem to be very important, because it is not referred to by her name. She's just called a queen of Vasitiputa Pulumavi. So, maybe she was a minor queen. But it seems to have given rise to this whole lesser or smaller lineage of the Satavahanas. One king that stands out in this is this chap called Vinuruddha Buddhananda Satakani. Now, this is very interesting, because his name obviously is Buddhananda. It mentions to it's a kind of a reference to Buddhism in this area, but all the symbolism that he adopts on his coins is Shaivite. I mean, there's a bull there on certain other coins. There's a trident as well. So bull and trident, very much Shaivite kind of Brahmanic symbolisms. But his name is Buddhananda. Very interestingly, he also mentions with his name as Dharma Maharaja. He calls himself the religious Maharaja, which is a title which is then adopted by a lot of other kings in the region, such as the early Pallavas, the early Kadambas, the early Vishnukundins, the Shalankayanas. They all call themselves as Dharma Maharaja. So there is a particular immediacy to this title, and the way the religious landscape in this region was changing. 2 other examples of more of these kind of lesser dynasty coins. One on the top has the inscription Rayon Vasitiputa. So this is definitely a Vasitiputa. We unfortunately, the next, the name further than that is not seen. And this is the coin at the bottom is a smaller fraction of Vinu Ruda Buddhananda Satakani. You can barely make out Vinu Ruda Buddhananda written on just about the bull. These coins come in various range of executions. The bull is not really articulated correctly at many times. Many times it's just very crude, many times it's very stylized, but the coins do belong to the same rulers of the same dynasty. A little bit of more to say about how the trade under Satavahanas flourished. We've seen that in 1st century AD, the Romans or the seafarers in the Indian Ocean region, quote unquote, discovered the monsoon winds. I mean, they did not discover the winds themselves, but they discovered their use. And they knew that at a particular time in the year, all you have to do is unfurl your sails and sit in the wind, and the boat will be driven by the wind to the coast of India. So the particular geographical uniqueness of Deccan then gave rise to this the kind of nexus between the trade and the politics of this. So we see that on the western coast there are lots of port sites, and the western Konkan strip is really a very narrow strip of land. It is immediately adjoined by this really big mountain range, the Western Ghats, and some of those Western Ghat ranges have passes in them. And a good example is the Nanighat Pass, which you can see in the picture on the right-hand side. And these were the trading arteries that linked the coast to the more important trading sites and urban markets that were emerging on the plateau of the Deccan region. The presence of trading communities in Deccan at this time, in Western India particularly, is very significant, because we know that they designate themselves as Yavanas, and this is the word that has been derived from the word Ionian or Yona from Prakrit and Greek, and this refers to a category of people who identified themselves. I mean, they probably were not really Greeks from Greece. They're probably more of Alexandrine origin, maybe Hellenized Egyptians, but somewhere from the Eastern Mediterranean region, where they came from that particular part of the world. In the inscriptions that they have left in the caves at Karla, say for example, mention them with this kind of very interesting plural appellation at the beginning of their word. So this example on the left-hand side says, this is an inscription, this is a donation by the Yavana of Yasavadhanas. So this Yasavadhana is mentioned in the plural. And similarly on the right, there is the Yavana of the Chitta Sangatas. So again, this is in the plural. So this is some way of identifying them by a kind of a surname or a group. And this is how they mention their identity while they inscribe their votive inscriptions. And a lot of these Yavana traders have patronized the Buddhist establishment, the rock-cut caves in Western India, and their presence has been historicized extremely well by the likes of trade historians like Himanshu Ray and Lionel Casson and lots of other people who work on specifically on the trade and commerce around this time. Another very famous name is Federico de Romanis, who talks a great deal about these inscriptions and the Indo-Roman trade in this particular period. There is a kind of a very interesting visual representation that we see of who these foreigners were. This is a medallion from the Amaravati Stupa, which is in Chennai Museum now at the moment. And you see that there is the king seated on the throne. This is kind of a centerpiece of all the composition. This is a depiction from a Jataka story. This is not depiction of a Satavahana king. This has been, the image of the Satavahana king has been artistically interpolated into the Jataka narrative as such. And here you see he's sitting on a throne, but below his throne is a group of people who are wearing a distinct, different sort of attire. They're using, they are wearing tunics, they have curly hair, they have a kind of frill coat that they're wearing at the top of their, there's a frilled, there's a hemming towards the end of their garment, and they're bringing these gifts to the king. This is a kind of classic example of the tradesman coming into the court of the king and giving him gifts. Very interestingly, you see toward the right of the composition, there's a figure where an Indian or maybe local person is introducing a foreign looking person to the king by showing him the hand. And very significantly, the foreign looking person is bringing in a horse into the assembly. So this is what these guys were up to. They were bringing in important trade goods, which were part of the king's army, the part of the king's wealth. So this was the kind of direct contribution that these foreigners were actually making to the Satavahana domains here. And this is a fantastic example of foreign presence in the contemporary court of sort of 1st century or 2nd century AD. The most significant impression that one gets of the trade is by issuance of coins which have representations of trade-related objects on them. So, for example, the Satavahanas, Satakani, for example, issued coins with this double-masted ship here, which you see on the top here. And on the obverse, there is a double-masted ship. Below the double-masted ship, there are symbols, not very clear on this particular coin, but on others, there are symbols of a fish and a conch shell. Now, both these emblems are associated greatly with the notion of prosperity. So this ship is not really any other ship. It is a ship that is bringing prosperity to the kingdom. It's a very clear message that the Satavahanas are putting on their coins. Very interestingly, ship-type coins were also issued by Romans. This is a 1st century AD coin issued by Nero, which shows the port of Ostia, which was servicing the city of Rome at that point, which was located on the mouth of the river Tiber. And you can see on the reverse, there is Neptune seated on a dolphin, and of course, a kind of a power of sea there, with a lot of ships in the harbor. And right in the middle, at about 12 o'clock position, the effigy of the lighthouse and in the harbor as well. So it's a very interesting bird's eye view of the harbor at Ostia on this coin of Nero. So it was not just this end of the spectrum, but the other side also issued ship-type coins. There were exchanges of very interesting architectural and symbolic motifs. Here we see a classic case. There's a hippocampus on coins of one of the coins of these Mahabhojas, which were ruling at Kuda on the western coast, as I mentioned a little earlier. But we see the same hippocampus then featuring on an inscription and in a position where usually a holy or important symbol is shown. So the deployment of the hippocampus in this inscription is not just a Mediterranean exotic emblem. It also signifies prosperity and a kind of Mangala attitude towards its positioning in this inscription. There have been in recently lots of transoceanic occurrences of coins from 1st century to 3rd century AD, not just Satavahana coins, but related coins as such. We have uninscribed die-struck coins from Gujarat found in Inkatat in Oman, Maliha and Edur in UAE. We have Western Kshatrapa coins found in Maliha, UAE, and also at Berenike in Egypt. They're in the most latest excavation reports of Berenike that have been published by Stephen Sidebottom. He mentioned a Satavahana coin at Berenike, and this is very interesting. I'll show you in a minute this picture. I have recently written, with the help of two of my French colleagues, an excavation find of a Chera coin of 1st century AD in Abu Quraya in Egypt. There are Kushan coins documented in Iraq, Ethiopia, South Oman. It's a site called Khorrori, which is very south tip of Oman, almost neighboring Yemen in the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. As against that, there are foreign coins also found in India. There are coins of 2nd century AD from the Empire of Aksum, which was located in Ethiopia, in Mangalore. There are coins from the Himyar territory, which is the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, the areas of Yemen and Aden, the kind of point that sort of appears in front of the Horn of Africa, that kind of region on the Arabian Peninsula. The Himyarite coins found in India and South Gujarat. They have been reported in many years ago by Oliver Codrington in the numismatic supplement to the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society of Bengal. And of course, there are many Roman coins found all across the Deccan. Currently, there is a project going on about documenting Romans out of the Roman Empire, and we are still building up a repertoire of how many Roman coins are encountered in India. They're found all over Deccan and in peninsular India, and also on east and west coasts. They usually are not found as hoards, but as single finds, and many times examples are used also in jewelry. Many times there are also Indian imitations of these Roman coins that are found. So it on its own, it's a ripe area for further investigation in what sort of role they played in the trade, as well as the social processes that were taking place on this coast. These are the pictures. The coin on the top is the coin that was published by Stephen Sidebottom, as found in Berenike in Egypt. And very interestingly, that is a coin of the Kondapur type. So this in Regio specifically, this particular type of lead coins with elephant and Ujjain symbol belongs to the Bhima Valley. And very significant that this coin of anything else should actually travel to Berenike in eastern Egypt. And that is an example of the Chera coin, which is under publication, will be published in the Numismatic Digest in the next issue. This was found at Abu Quraya in an excavation, which is very significant, because in India itself, we have not much information about an archaeological context for this kind of coins, and they are mainly uninscribed, so we don't know who struck them. But for the first time in Egypt, they have been found in a datable archaeological context. Very significant discovery, and we shall be reporting it quite soon in the Numismatic Digest. Example of trade goods is most fantastically represented by these two pictures, classic cases. The ivory figurine of Indian manufacture found in the ruins at Pompeii, and a bronze figurine of Poseidon found in Brahmapuri in Kolhapur, Western India, possibly of an Alexandrine manufacture. These two objects are absolute key objects to envisage the East meets West narrative, the intercourse between East and West. Much like, these actually give you the two ends of the spectrum. One is in Deccan, one is in Rome. One is where the trade was originating. One is where the trade kind of ended, and where the destination of the trade was. But nowadays, we know a lot of objects that are found in between as well. So we can populate the picture of the trade in these objects and Indian sailors with it, most likely throughout these on the coast, on the trade routes between the Eastern Mediterranean on one side, on the west, and the Indian Peninsula on the east. And most significantly is this absolutely fantastic bronze figurine of a Shalabhanjika, surely of a Satavahana manufacture, with the shape, the jewelry, and the position. And this was found in Khorrori, which is located on the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. This particular place, by the way, is mentioned by the name of Moskhalimen in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, and it was a major site of frankincense trade. This was a very important organic plant-derived material that was used for disinfection and burning into incense burners. It's kind of incense resin, which is called frankincense, and it was mainly manufactured and collected through by injuring the plants that grew in this kind of very arid desert area in South Arabia. It was in the local inscription. The port has been called as Sumhurum, and this object was discovered in the excavations at this particular place. Absolutely stunning example of another Satavahana beauty, which is not very well known. Currently, this is in the Freer-Sackler Gallery in Washington, D.C., and this is where this has been deposited. So to conclude, I have given you a lot of food to chew over Satavahana coins. All I can say really is that they're historical evidence par excellence. There is nothing more historically significant than Satavahana coinage to understand the period 1st century BC to about 2nd or 3rd century AD, what was happening in the Deccan at that time. The coins force us to rethink the political and economic landscape of peninsular India. We know much more through coins than we would have otherwise known from other sources of historical evidence. It also is very interesting, though this is something that historians would take forward, the kind of polity existing in early historic India, or particularly medieval India, has been described to have composed of these two models. One was the feudalism model, which was forwarded by Ramcharan Sharma, and the segmented state model, which was forwarded by Burton Stein. And the segmented state model, we talk about kingship, which is divided into little segments of authority. So there's a king at the top, and then there are various levels of feudatory princes, titles, little lesser rajas, who all wield authority of some kind, and that authority is ultimately vested in the emperor at the top, but it is then sort of divulged down, percolated downwards into this structure. We see from coins, we see that this sort of segmented state existed around in India kind of much earlier than what other historians have proposed it to be. Similarly, feudalism, there are these characters such as Mahatalavaras, Maharathis, Mahasenapatis. How do they actually fit into the later feudalization model is a very interesting historical study that we can take forward to. The coinage is absolutely important, crucial for understanding the backbone of the chronology of what's going on in here. And we can see, as I showed you, there are particular chronological markers that we can arrive at in terms of situating or contextualizing the coins on a chronological scale, and they help us knowing more about what exactly was going on chronologically at this time. This particular importance of the coins have ramifications to understand and underpin all sorts of other related subjects, such as archaeology, art and architecture, the trade and commerce. All this, the understanding of all these phenomena is based on our understanding of how we understand and underpin the chronology of the period, and how then these various processes are then mapped onto this. I must say that with this, I shall conclude my talk. I shall go back to the Facebook page and end my slideshow. But I probably will be back next Sunday with a different topic. So till then, all the best. Keep happy, keep safe, keep busy, and see you all probably next Sunday again. Thanks a lot for joining. All the best. Bye-bye.